and there's nothing there. I mean, there's a driveway for another farm, but it's not and there's another hill. I'm thinking, how far do I go before it's getting dark and I'm in the wrong place? Ever been in a spot like that where you didn't know whether to go forward or back and didn't have any way to get where you were going? It's kind of scary. I wasn't frightened. I flagged down someone in a car. Hey! And he stopped. Where is this place? And Lord, have mercy, he called them up on the phone. And turns out it was over the next hill. Never saw me before. Never saw him before. I don't know. Was I foolish? All I know is I wasn't afraid. And I want to talk about fear today, but I'll use the pulpit a little bit so I don't make you all seasick wandering back and forth. I need to read some of these words too, because I worked on them a lot yesterday and I hate to just throw them away. This month, as you may know if you've been here, as I've been chronicling my journey across the north of England alongside Hadrian's Wall, but I'm also chronicling some of the story of our church and liberal religion, and I've also been talking about the Wizard of Oz, 4 journeys kind of braided together as we approach our future, our annual meeting, the annual pledge drive, strategic plans. It's a way to unearth some thoughts and feelings, some hopes. So if you've been here, you know I've already talked about if I only had a brain, and talked about how our legacy as a liberal church is to want to go in search of the truth wherever it leads, the pilgrim church. And last week I talked about the spiritual depth that confronting diversity really involves, that we have to go deep inside ourselves to find those places that have not been touched, to ask how we can listen and be present to people of different races, classes, sexualities, different environments. My illustrious forebear that Earl cited earlier, Duncan Littlefair, who was a momentous presence here, once described this as the impossible church. And he meant by that a church where all religious points of view, and even no religious points of view, could be affirmed and celebrated and respected. But I want to take that notion and go a little further. Can we also be the impossible church when it comes to race, class, sexuality, and ethnicity? That's the spiritual challenge, I think, because we know how comfortable we are around people we know and how hard it is to be around people we don't know. And those are the 2 things I've done so far. And this week I'm going to push you a little further. Yes, I'm going to make the hill a little steeper. And I'm hoping what I offer you is a walking stick to get up that hill. Because my dream for this church, for every church I've served, but it comes closer to being true here than any church I've been in. Well, my dream, you'll hear about it in a moment. But I want to start by giving you that walking stick. I want to talk about the thing that keeps us from climbing the hills of our personal lives, of our institutional lives, maybe our national life. Fear. And what better a place to start than those famous lyrics? Yeah, it's sad, believe me, missy, when you're born to be a sissy without the vim and voive. Someone said it should be spelled V-O-I-V-E. But I could show my prowess, be a lion, not a mouse, if I only had the nerve. I would go on, but the verse begins to invoke a stereotype of gay men being a dandelion, and that's not fair. But in L. Frank Baum's book, the lion, a much more literary creature, says, I suppose I was born that way. It is my great sorrow, and it makes my life very unhappy. But whenever there is danger, my heart begins to beat fast. But that's true of everyone, isn't it? Wherever there is danger, we feel the thumping in our chest. Some people feel it more readily than others. A few years ago, I read in the New York Times Magazine and chased it down at a reference in Nature magazine that 38 to 42% of us are just naturally anxious. That's the way our DNA is written. We tend to jump a little higher when startled. We tend to be a little more palpitating when anxious. We're the canaries in the mine of life. We spook readily. And I say we because I'm definitely one of those guys. I tend to be more, well, let me put it this way. I don't read whodunit books. I haven't been to a horror movie since I was 12. And the Twilight Saga never saw daylight with me. What's a guy like me to do? What's a guy like you to do if that's who you are? Well, that goes back to why I'm trudging through the English countryside. But I'll give another example of a moment when fear can turn up in a less likely place. This past Wednesday night, once a month I invite people to come and we do a potluck evening, potluck supper, potluck worship, and we do a little conversation around spirituality. So far, it's not a hit. I mean, about a dozen of us turn up. That includes about 5 kids, 5 little boys. And our potluck outcome, and it really was potluck, with 2 kinds of cookies, 1 kind of bread, and a homemade pizza, and a bowl of berries. And I said, this is not going to make it. What am I going to do? And when I was younger and more anxious, because I have learned, I would begin to fret. I'd be doing this in my head, if not in my hands. But I told myself, there's an answer here. And I looked in the refrigerator, and we've just cleaned it out, by the way. But I found 14 eggs, Parmesan cheese, and some old frozen whole wheat bread, and so we made a frittata. And it was enough. Now, could have been better. Could have been a more elegant supper, but we all ate. We were all fed. And why am I telling you this? Because we all face moments when we suddenly feel as though failure or danger is imminent, and what happens is we become involved in our own feelings about what's happening, not what's actually happening. You know what I mean. What will people think? I'm going to fail. I'm going to let people down. Do you ever do those scripts in your own head? Of course you do. You don't tell anyone. Most of us, when danger or unhappiness is present, feel certain clenching qualities. And I mention this because those are the things that make it hard to thrive. One of the things that happens when we feel fear, especially the inner fear of judgment, is our vision narrows to the fear itself. All we see is the thing that we're afraid of, which means all the other choices vanish. I see a head nodding. Yeah, you've been there, haven't you? The other thing that happens is that we feel this clenching part in our gut. And our heart kind of clenches, and the only thing we want to do is get the hell out of Dodge. You know what I mean? We want to run away because it feels so bad. And both of those alternatives are bad because, as I mentioned, the fear is not out there, the lack of food. It isn't even out here in the moorlands of England. It's in here. So no matter how much you put on your blinders, it's still there. And no matter how far you run, it's still with you. So most of the fear we deal with in our life, we cannot escape and we cannot avoid, no matter how hard we try. And yet that's why we keep acting that way. But I've got good news. And this is a lifetime of work on fear, and I'm still working on it. When you have a brain, you can think even when you're afraid. That's one of the things I want to tell you. As the wizard told the lion, and you already heard about that you all you have to do is face your danger. And the lion found someone to help him do that in the Wizard of Oz. Courage starts when we know that we are afraid, when we know what the fear is. This past Thursday, I went visiting people, as I do once a month among some of our less mobile members. And I visited with a great old man, and it's not a shame to call him old, he's north of 80, be proud.